After being captured and enduring 2 weeks of torture, Leonard Siflete, a sergeant in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, was beheaded by Japanese officer Yasuno Chikao on Aitape Beach in Papua New Guinea on the orders of Vice Admiral Michiaki Kamada. Siflete was 27 years old. This was only a drop in the sea of Japanese war crimes during World War II. Wherever Japanese soldiers deployed during the 1930s and 1940s, they perpetrated barbaric and well-documented crimes against humanity. Examples are legion: widespread massacres of Chinese civilians in places like Nanking, the gang rape and murder of captured British and Chinese nurses following the fall of Hong Kong, the murder of Dutch and Indonesian civilians and wounded Allied prisoners throughout the East Indies, the beheadings of downed Allied airmen, and the thousands of British, Australian, Dutch, and American prisoners who perished during forced labor in steaming Southeast Asian jungles or in mines in Japan and Korea. Such grim statistics beg questions. Why was the Japanese military so deliberately brutal toward defeated enemies and the civilian populations of conquered lands? What were the causes of such behavior? Can we ever understand why they committed crimes that go so far beyond generally accepted military conduct? Japan's wartime cruelty had deep historical roots. From the early 1600s to 1868, Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, a military dictatorship that isolated the country from the world. The samurai, a class of warriors, followed the Bushido code, which demanded strict loyalty and bravery. This culture of obedience and discipline was deeply ingrained in Japanese society. In the 1850s, Japan opened up to Western trade, exposing its weaknesses compared to advanced Western powers. Progressive samurai sought to restore the emperor's rule and modernize Japan's industry and military. When Emperor Meiji became a constitutional monarch, samurai loyalty shifted from the shogun to the emperor, making him a national symbol. Japan's victories in wars against China and Russia reinforced its military power and belief in its right to build an empire in Asia. Racism from Western powers after World War I made Japanese thinkers resentful. Nationalists like Shumei Okawa argued that Japan was destined to lead Asia. This thinking, combined with Japan's military successes, bred extreme nationalism and xenophobia. The emperor was declared divine in 1890, which was taught in schools, leading many Japanese to believe in the emperor's absolute authority and the racial superiority of the Japanese people. Colonel Kingoro Hashimoto, a nationalist leader, promoted the idea of Kodo, or the way of the emperor, insisting all aspects of life should focus on the emperor. This belief, along with media reinforcement, created a culture of unquestioning obedience and superiority. This mindset contributed to the brutal behavior of Japanese forces in China, such as the rape of Nanking. In the early 20th century, Japan sought acceptance from Western nations but faced racism and exclusion. This led to increased nationalism and militarism. Japan's rapid military expansion worried Western powers, who imposed restrictive treaties, further angering Japan. This hostility helped radical elements within the Japanese military seize control. They believed in Japan's racial superiority and divine mission. They spread a twisted version of Bushido, saying surrender was dishonorable. This belief led to the brutal treatment of prisoners of war and extreme cruelty by the Japanese during World War II. The Japanese military taught recruits that they were racially superior and destined to rule the world. Training was brutal, and obedience to officers was absolute, as they were seen as representatives of the divine emperor. This cultural mindset led to widespread atrocities, as soldiers believed they were fulfilling the emperor's will. Japan's military leaders, particularly Tojo, justified harsh treatment of prisoners as a cultural difference. They saw it as necessary for Japan's war effort. The brutal treatment of prisoners and the belief in racial superiority were key factors in the widespread atrocities committed by Japanese forces during the war. Ultimately, Japan's defeat allowed the Allies to try many Japanese war criminals, although not all were brought to justice. The sheer scale of Japan's wartime atrocities, driven by a mix of nationalism, racism, and a distorted sense of duty, remains a dark chapter in history.